The last part of the brain we're going to talk about is the different subdivisions of the cortex. So there's four main lobes we're going to talk about, named after the skeletal bones is the lobes, and there's a left side and a right side for each one. So we have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. So the cerebrum, like I said, is divided into two hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum. That's a vocab word. Make sure you know that. So you have a left and right sided part of the brain, and the corpus callosum is the only thing that connects it, right? So it facilitates interhemispheric communication. So there is something called a split brain surgery that they used to do a lot, and they would use to cut it, and so the person could actually live a pretty normal life without it. A lot of times they would do it if they had epilepsy, if they were having seizures, because that communication going back and forth was a little off, a little haywire, and so they found out if they cut it, it would calm everything down. Right? But that's what the corpus callosum does. It communicates back and forth between the left and right side of the brain, so it can work in harmony. So each hemisphere is divided into four lobes. The frontal lobe deals with speech, muscle movement, making plans, and judgments. So like with Phineas Gage, which you read about and we talk about, he had that tampering rod that went through his frontal lobe where he was a foreman before. Now he can't make plans. He doesn't make good judgments. His decision making is not very good. So I also mentioned how like serial killers and violent people tend to have very little activity going on in the frontal lobe, right? So they keep making bad decisions, right? Being violent, things like that. So that frontal lobe is not very active. So your brain actually develops from back to front. So your frontal lobe is actually the last thing to fully develop. That's why, and it doesn't fully develop to around 25. That's why teenagers tend to make bad decisions, is because their frontal lobe isn't fully developed yet. A lot of students like to use that as an excuse. You can try with your parents, but don't say I told you. Parietal lobe. This one deals with touch and body position. All right, so you have your sensory and motor cortex around this area. Your occipital lobe is actually in the back of your head. So this is where your vision comes from. So if you've ever been hit in the back of your head and all of a sudden you saw stars or it went black for a second, that's because that's where your vision actually comes from. So if you get hit really hard in the back of the head, you could actually go blind. And then the last one is your temporal lobe on the sides of your head. That's your auditory. So if you think about what's on the sides of your heads, your ears. So that deals with hearing. And then we have the cerebral cortex. This is the surface of each hemisphere. So it's highly folded to increase the surface area available within the confines of the skull. That's why you see like that foldy thing on the outside of your brain. So this is all your higher order thinking, right? It controls perception, memory, higher cognitive functions, including the ability to concentrate, reason, to think abstractly. So we talked about brain evolution. This would be the highest part of the brain evolution. They say like Albert Einstein, they said he had really deep folds in his cerebral cortex, and that's one of the reasons why he was so smart, right? Because this is where your higher order thinking comes from. They say if you actually take it and lay it flat, it's about the size of a pillowcase, right? So if you think about the size of a pillowcase, all folded up into the top part of your brain. So just make sure you know cerebral cortex is that higher order thinking. So more areas of the brain. We have a few specialized areas that are named after people who realize that these specific areas have different functions. Now, Broca's area and Wernicke's area are two that we're going to be talking about a couple different times this year, so make sure you remember them. Broca's area is linked to speech production, so speaking. So I'm speaking right now, I'm using my Broca's area. Wernicke's area is involved in understanding of written and spoken language. So like listening and reading. So you understanding what I'm saying, you're using your Wernicke's area. Right? If you're reading your textbook, you're using your Wernicke's area. Or Wernicke. I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. All right, so very important. Broca is speaking, Wernicke is understanding it. So if you have damage to each of these areas, like maybe you're in a car accident or it's common for like a stroke and you have damage to the Broca's area, that means you wouldn't be able to speak anymore. You could understand what people were saying, but you wouldn't be able to speak. Now you could communicate maybe in other ways like writing it out, but you wouldn't be able to actually speak. If you had damage to Wernicke's area, like through a stroke, you could talk, but you wouldn't understand what you were saying. You would kind of make random words. But you would be able to sing familiar songs because that's a different part of your brain. So even though, like if you had damage, especially if you had damage to Broca's area and you can't speak anymore, but you could still sing familiar songs because that's a different part of the brain, they found out. So this is kind of small. I just thought it was kind of interesting. So this is your brain on the piano. So playing the piano, they say playing the piano is very good for your brain development. That's why I've had both my kids play musical instruments starting when they were young, about 5 or 6, because I wanted to help their brain development. So I know this is kind of small. I'm not sure if you can read this all, but it just goes through and just shows how playing the piano, you're using all parts of your brain, like your eyes, your hands, your ears, how you have to deal with spatial, this spatial with the fingers, the timing, using all your fingers, you use your feet, when you get more advanced on the piano. So it's just a cool little breakdown of how playing the piano uses so many different parts of the brain and trains the brain, which is extremely important. So research. A guy you should know called Roger Sperry. He's the scientist who first split the corpus callosum, like I was talking about earlier. So he actually discovered that this connection could be cut into with little or no noticeable change in the patient's mental abilities. He found that the corpus callosum provides a means of communication between the two halves of the brain and integrates the knowledge acquired by each of them. And so I'm going to post a video after this called Split Brain Joe, and you're going to be able to see, because he had split brain surgery, there's no communication going on between the two hemispheres. So he can actually draw a picture, and you guys can try doing this right now if you want. Try drawing two different things at the exact same time with each hand. So try drawing like a dog with your left hand and try drawing a house with your right hand at the exact same time. It's very hard to do because you're having parts of your brain trying to tell your left and right side to do two different things. He could do it with no problem because he doesn't have that communication issue because his left and right side of his brains are separated. So his right brain, which I'll show you guys in a second. So you see here, so your right brain actually controls the entire left side of your body. All right, so your left eye is actually going to your right brain and vice versa. Your left brain controls your right side of your body. So if you have a stroke and you have damage on your left, like your left face, now that was your right side of your brain that you had the stroke in. All right, so you see this optic chiasm where it kind of crosses over. So whatever in your right visual field is processed, right? So you have the apple here, and your right visual field, right, is being processed by your left brain, right, and then vice versa. So, and you're gonna see this if we're able to. There's an episode of House where the guy had split brain surgery. You'll see the split brain Joe video. Like they'll say, they'll put a word on the screen. If it's in his left visual, right, that's processed by your right side of your brain, that's your artistic side. So if they say, what word is that? He's like, I don't see a word. Because language is on the left side of your body, or left brain, I should say. But your artistic side is on your right brain. So if it's in his left visual field, he could draw a picture of it, but he couldn't say it. And the opposite, if it's in his right visual field, meaning his left, brain was processing it, he could say the word no problem. So here's a bunch of left hemisphere versus right hemisphere things. I have handouts on them. You guys can look this over. Not that you need to know every single thing, but just kind of know some of the basics of it, right? So your left hemisphere tends to be your rational side, very sequential, likes things in order. It's very organized, right? So people who so-called left brain, they like math and science, very logistical things, right? They like things planned out. Like I'm a left brain person. I like things organized, like, like my closet's very organized by color, by brand, because I'm a left brain person. My best subjects in school were math. Now, right brain people, they're a little bit, they're the opposite. These are your artistic people, right? They like things a little messy, right? So their bedrooms tend to be on the messy side. Like I said, very artsy, musical tends to be on this side, um, spontaneous. You know, they don't necessarily need things clean. They like it a little bit messy. And lastly, why are some people left-handed? All right, and so this is, I'll post this in the playlist as well. It's a great little 5-minute video that answers this question on why are people left-handed. It kind of goes throughout the history of it. It's a very good video that you guys will enjoy.